Have you ever wondered how much you would have to make in a year to own a private jet? When I see people on the internet flexing that they bought a jet, I'm always curious what they make in a year. But it's always difficult to figure it out because no one talks about it. Luckily, one of my favorite YouTubers, MeetKevin, recently purchased his own private jet. He took the time to explain to all of his subscribers exactly what it costs him. And since recording this, he has deleted the video, meaning you can't find this information anywhere else. So in this video, I'm going to review what MeetKevin is paying for his jet, but I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to tell you when it makes sense to buy a private jet, how much you would have to make every year for you to be able to afford it, and I'm going to show you how you can apply the calculation we use to your everyday finances. So even if you have no desire to own a jet, don't go anywhere, because I promise this simple rule is one you can use in your everyday life. Let's dive in. But first, in order to figure out how much you would have to make to own a jet, we have to figure out how much it costs on a yearly basis. Kevin spent $13 million on his plane. It's the Phenom 300E. He financed his plane and he tells us how much he's paying a year for his loan.
The loan on the plane, since I financed the plane, the payments on that of about $888,000 a year.
On top of the $888,000 loan payment, there are fixed costs, which are expenses that you have to pay regardless of whether you fly the thing or not.
Let's say you hire 2 pilots, because even though a lot of planes can be flown by 1 pilot, planes are a lot safer when you have redundancies. Now, if you pay $470,000 in salaries, you're probably going to be paying another $141,000 in salary additions. Those are things like workers' comp and payroll taxes. You've got about $50,000 in annual flight training to keep a jet pilot's type rating. Hangar probably will cost you about $50,000 a year. Insurance with 2 pilots, about $40,000 a year. Management, about $60,000. Additional miscellaneous costs, things break, right? It's mechanical, so assume $50,000 a year. Internet, these are now called your fixed costs. These are things that you're paying whether or not you're flying the plane. That's $921,000 whether or not you actually take off.
So you're gonna have to pay over $1.8 million a year just to own the jet. And we haven't even gotten to how much you have to pay to fly it. After your loan payment and fixed costs come variable costs. These are the costs you're gonna have to pay for using the plane.
Moving on, variable costs to plane ownership. Maintenance, consider these as hourly costs. This is really important. Hourly costs. Maintenance, about $125 an hour. These are usually maintenance programs. Engine programs, probably about $250 per flight hour. Tires and brakes, $30 per flight hour. Gas, $915 per hour. That brings your total variable cost for flying versus not flying to $1,320.
So when does it make sense to actually buy a jet? Well, the more money you make, the more you try to pay for convenience. For example, I like to pay for meal delivery services rather than cooking my own food. It's no jet, but it makes my life easier. But for people in the 1% who have to travel a lot, one of the biggest inconveniences is flying commercial, so they look to fly private. When you fly private, the 2 most popular options are to charter a jet or buy one. So in this clip, Kevin breaks down how much he was paying per hour for using NetJets, a private jet chartering service,
versus $14,000 with a charter.
He tells us he was paying around $14,000 an hour for a charter. When we compare this to the cost of him owning a jet, a loan payment of $888,000, fixed costs of $921,000, and hourly costs of $1,320 an hour, we can determine the number of hours he would have to fly every year for it to make sense to buy a private jet. We can see from this calculation that at 143 hours of chartering a jet, he would pay a little over $2 million a year. And if he were to fly the same number of hours with his own jet, the total cost would be slightly under $2 million a year, meaning that at 143 hours, it becomes cheaper to fly your own jet rather than chartering someone else's. To put it in perspective, flying 143 hours is like flying from New York to California about 24 times. While it's cool to see the numbers behind owning a private jet, why should you care? Well, oftentimes a private jet is the biggest vehicle purchase for a wealthy person. But for us average folks, the most expensive vehicle purchase we'll make are typically our cars. When it comes to determining how much you can pay for a car, there is a rule known as the 20-4-10 rule.
Today we're talking about the 20-4-10 rule, the next car buying rule, and it's known as the 20-4-10 rule.
Is the 20-4-10 approach, which is a very simple yet very effective strategy when making a wise car purchase.
The way it works is if you're going to buy a car, you should put 20% of the purchase price as a down payment. You shouldn't finance the car for more than 4 years, and the monthly payments, including maintenance, shouldn't exceed 10% of your income. So if you follow those rules, you can figure out the maximum monthly payment you can afford, ultimately determining the price you can pay for a car, which is why we're going to use it to determine how much you would have to make to own a jet. So to purchase this jet, a 20% down payment would be $3.25 million. If we factor in the cost of operating the jet and the loan, Kevin is paying a little over $1.8 million a year. One thing the 24/10 rule doesn't take into account is how much you pay for gas on a monthly basis. So I'm not going to include the variable costs of flying the jet. So in order for $1.8 million a year to not exceed 10% of your income, you would have to make a little over $18 million a year to comfortably afford this jet. Even if you have no plans to buy a jet, learning how much you need to make to own a jet teaches you about the 24/10 rule, which is a rule you should follow when purchasing cars, boats, or any vehicles in your life. The total cost of these vehicles combined should never exceed 10% of your income. You should finance them for no longer than 4 years, and you always should put 20% down. So next time you go to the dealership, run the numbers like you're gonna buy a jet. It will ensure you buy a car you can actually afford. But there's one thing I left out. How can you make enough money to buy a jet one day? Well, since I have no experience in this area, I like to listen to advice given by people that actually own their own jets. People like Warren Buffett, Tony Robbins, Grant Cardone, and more. And one common piece of investing advice they give is to invest in yourself. But for the longest time, I had no idea what that meant. That's until Sean Purry, a serial entrepreneur worth millions, made a great video breaking down exactly how you can invest in yourself. So check out this video next if you want to learn about the best investment you'll ever make.